Texas frontier, winter of 1882. Frost clung to the dirt trail like crushed glass, the wind slicing between tall pine trees. The cold had settled in for weeks, not just the kind that bit fingers and toes, but the kind that made men quieter, more deliberate. The crack of gunfire shattered the stillness. Ethan Blackwood dove from his horse, hitting the frozen ground with practiced precision. A second shot splintered bark inches from his head. 45 years of hard living had honed his instincts razor sharp. His hand found the Winchester rifle strapped to his saddle before his boots fully touched dirt. 3 men, positioned in the trees. Amateur ambush. "Picked the wrong day, boys," Ethan muttered, tasting blood from his split lip. The first attacker broke cover, racing between pines. Ethan's rifle barked once. The man dropped. The second fired wildly, giving away his position. Ethan worked the lever action, aimed, exhaled. Another shot. Another man down. The third attacker, bearded, desperate, emerged screaming, pistol blazing. Ethan rolled right, ignoring the fiery pain in his shoulder as a bullet grazed him. His final shot caught the man square in the chest. The outlaw staggered backward, eyes wide with disbelief before collapsing. Silence returned to the forest, broken only by Ethan's heavy breathing and the nervous shuffle of his horse buck. Blood stained the snow crimson beneath the fallen men. One was still breathing, crawling toward the underbrush. Ethan approached cautiously, Winchester trained on the wounded man. "Who sent you?" The man spat blood. "Go to hell, Reb. Already been. Didn't care for the company." Ethan's voice remained flat, emotionless. 5 years since Appomattox, and some still couldn't let the war die. The wounded man dragged himself into the brush before Ethan could question him further. Blood trail led into dense thicket. Following meant leaving buck exposed. Ethan sighed, checking his shoulder wound. Not deep, but bleeding freely. He'd had worse at Shiloh, at Chancellorsville, at a dozen places time had tried to erase from memory. "Come on, Buck," he murmured, retrieving the reins of his nervous mount. "Let's find our friend." The blood trail wound through the underbrush, eventually leading to a small clearing. Ethan moved silently, tracking skills honed from years of necessity. The wounded man had disappeared, but something else caught Ethan's attention. A figure lay crumpled beside a fallen log, partially covered with snow. Not his attacker. Approaching cautiously, rifle ready, Ethan discovered an elderly Apache woman. Her weathered face was lined with exhaustion, lips cracked from dehydration. Her breath came in shallow gasps, forming weak clouds in the frigid air. She was alive, but barely. Ethan knelt beside her, wincing as his injured shoulder protested. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, dark, alert despite her condition. She studied him without fear, almost with recognition. "Water," Ethan said, reaching for his canteen. She drank sparingly, with dignity. When she spoke, her voice was rough but clear. "I heard you need help with your land. My daughter is perfect for that." Ethan blinked, taken aback. Before he could respond, the old woman brought 2 fingers to her lips and gave a sharp whistle. The sound echoed through the trees. Ethan tensed, rifle instinctively rising. From the tree line, perhaps 20 paces away, a second figure emerged. Younger, moving with practiced stealth, despite obvious exhaustion. A woman, perhaps 30, her dark hair adorned with small feathers and leather cords. She wore deerskin clothing, practical but worn thin by hard travel. A bow was slung across her back, a knife visible at her hip. Her eyes locked with Ethan's, not hostile but wary, assessing. She approached slowly, her gaze never leaving his rifle. "Your friend's heading south," she said, her English clear but accented. 3 more men waiting for him at the creek bend. Ethan lowered his weapon slightly. "You've been tracking me," We've been tracking them. She nodded toward where the attackers had fallen. They attacked 2 families east of here. Killed a man. The older woman spoke again, this time in Apache. The younger woman responded briefly before turning back to Ethan. I am Ayana. This is my mother, Nala. She gestured to the elderly woman. She needs shelter. Ethan studied them both, weighing options. The woman, Ayana, carried herself like someone accustomed to danger. Her eyes constantly scanned their surroundings. One hand remained near her knife, not threatening him, but ready. There's a price on Apache heads in this county, Ethan said flatly. Sheriff Wilson's not particular about which Apache. We know you're sheriff, Ayana replied, a flash of contempt crossing her features. We also know you fought him during your war, saved 3 of our people from his men 2 winters ago. Ethan's jaw tightened. News traveled, even in wilderness. My mother cannot travel further, Ayana continued. We need shelter for the night. In return, I will help you track those who attacked you. Ethan glanced at his bleeding shoulder, then at the fading daylight. 4 more attackers meant poor odds, especially wounded. My place is an hour's ride, he said finally. Your mother can ride Buck. You'll walk. And your trust, Ayana asked, that you'll have to earn. Ethan began reloading his Winchester. Same as I will. The settlement of Creek Junction came into view as they crested the final hill, a scattered collection of buildings huddled against the coming night. Smoke rose from chimneys, lamps glowed in windows. Civilization, such as it was on the frontier. Ethan had avoided the main street, taking back trails. Nala rode silently atop Buck, wrapped in Ethan's spare blanket. Ayana walked beside the horse, one hand on her mother's leg for stability. Neither woman had spoken much during the journey. We'll skirt town, Ethan said, voice low. Less attention that way. Ayana nodded, but her posture had tensed. Ethan followed her gaze and cursed under his breath. Sheriff Benjamin Wilson stood at the crossroads ahead, alongside 2 deputies. Their horses were saddled, rifles ready, a patrol preparing to ride. Problem, Mr. Blackwood? Wilson's voice carried across the distance, measured and cold. Ethan halted Buck with a gentle tug on the reins. Just passing through, Sheriff. Wilson approached slowly, spurs jingling with each step. His weathered face, framed by a neatly trimmed beard gone mostly gray, betrayed nothing. The badge on his chest caught the fading sunlight. Interesting company you're keeping. Wilson's eyes fixed on Ayana, then Nala. Especially with Apache raiders hitting the Turner place yesterday. These women had nothing to do with that, Ethan replied evenly. That's so. Wilson's hand rested on his holstered Colt. And you've become an expert on Apache affairs now? I know trouble when I see it, Ethan said, meeting Wilson's gaze, and when I don't. The air between them crackled with old tension. They'd faced each other across different battlefields years ago, Wilson commanding Union cavalry, Ethan leading Confederate infantry. Neither had forgotten. Town councils authorized me to detain any Apache in the county, Wilson said. For questioning, they're with me, Ethan replied, hand casually moving closer to his rifle. Heading to my place, one of Wilson's deputies stepped forward. Sheriff, we should... Wilson raised a hand, silencing him. His eyes never left Ethan's. I heard you had some trouble back on the mountain trail. 3 men shot dead. Self-defense, Ethan said. They ambushed me. Convenient, no witnesses. Wilson's mouth twitched. Except your new friends here. Ayana stood silently, but Ethan noticed her shift slightly, positioning herself between Wilson and her mother. We have business to attend to, Blackwood, Wilson finally said. But this conversation isn't finished. I'll be paying a visit to your property tomorrow. He stepped aside, gesturing for his men to do the same. One more thing, Wilson called as Ethan began moving past. That Apache band we're tracking? They're looking for a woman who escaped them. Young, travels with an elder. His eyes locked on Ayana. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Ethan didn't reply, keeping Buck moving steadily forward. Only when they cleared the town limits did he exhale slowly. You didn't mention being hunted, he said quietly to Ayanna. You didn't mention your war with the sheriff, she countered. Fair point. They continued in silence as darkness settled across the landscape. Ethan's cabin stood alone at the edge of a small clearing, backed by dense forest on three sides. A modest corral housed a few horses and cattle. Chicken coops stood nearby, a thin wisp of smoke still rising from the stone chimney, his morning fire not completely dead. It's not much, Ethan said as he helped Nala down from Buck. It has walls, Ayanna replied, and a roof. That's enough. Inside, Ethan stoked the fire while Ayanna helped her mother settle near the hearth. The cabin's single room was sparsely furnished, a bed in one corner, table and chairs, storage chests, and a small kitchen area. Rifles hung on the wall alongside tools. Everything practical, nothing ornamental, except for one item, a faded daguerreotype in a simple frame on the mantel. A young woman with gentle eyes and a quiet smile. Ayanna noticed his gaze lingering on the image. Your wife? Was going to be, Ethan said, his voice suddenly rough. Fever took her. 5 years ago. He busied himself with tending his shoulder wound, unwilling to elaborate further. Ayanna respected his silence, focusing on making her mother comfortable. Later, as they ate a simple meal of rabbit stew, Nala spoke for the first time since arriving. The men who attacked you, she said, her voice stronger than before. They were paid. Ethan looked up from his bowl. By who? The man with the star, Ayanna answered. Your sheriff. Ethan set down his spoon. Wilson? Why would he? Your land, Nala interrupted. He wants it. The railroad comes soon. Ethan considered this. The proposed railway extension had been rumored for months. Property values would soar if the line came through. How do you know this? He asked. We listen, Ayanna said simply. When white men think no one hears, they speak freely. The sheriff and men with papers meet at the saloon. They have maps of this area. It made sense. Wilson had been pushing Ethan to sell for months, each offer lower than the last. There's something else, Ayanna said, hesitation in her voice. She glanced at her mother, who nodded slightly. We didn't leave our people by choice. We were forced out. By who? Makya, Nala said, disgust evident in her pronunciation. Son of our chief, he wanted Ayanna. She refused. He attacked me, Ayanna said, her face hardening at the memory. I defended myself, cut him, made him bleed before his men. Ethan nodded slowly, understanding dawning. And now he wants revenge. He will not stop, Nala confirmed. His pride is wounded. In his mind, Ayanna belongs to him. And your sheriff, Ayanna added, has made a deal with Makya. Find us, return me to him, and the Apache will not trouble the town's expansion. The pieces fell into place. Wilson's ambush party had failed. Tomorrow he would come with deputies, using the law as cover to take Ethan's land and the two women. Get some rest, Ethan said, standing abruptly. Tomorrow will come early. He moved to the window, staring into the darkness. Decisions crystallized in his mind. He'd fought in the war to protect his way of life. He'd built this place with his own hands after losing everything. He wouldn't surrender it or these women without a fight. Outside, snow began to fall. A storm was coming. Dawn broke gray and uncertain, the promised storm holding its breath over the mountains. Ethan had slept little, keeping watch through the night. Ayanna joined him before first light, moving silently to his side at the window. Your mother? He asked quietly. Sleeping, she replied. The fever returned in the night. Ethan glanced at the elderly woman's still form near the hearth. Her breathing seemed more labored than before. She needs medicine, Ayanna continued. Herbs I could find in the forest. There's no time, Ethan said. Wilson will come today, and possibly your Makya. Ayanna's expression hardened at the name. Then we prepare. Together, they worked through early morning, reinforcing windows, positioning weapons, creating fields of fire. Ethan was impressed by Ayana's tactical knowledge. She understood defensible positions, sight lines, the psychology of attackers. "Your people taught you well," he commented as they stored extra ammunition near each window. "My father was war chief before Makia's father killed him," she replied matter-of-factly. "He believed daughters should know battle as well as sons." By midday, the cabin was as fortified as possible. Ethan checked his weapons one final time. The Winchester, 2 Colt revolvers, a shotgun, and a heavy knife. Ayana had her bow, knife, and now one of Ethan's spare pistols. As they finished preparations, Nala called weakly from her pallet. Ayana went to her immediately, kneeling beside her. Their conversation in Apache was brief, intense. When Ayana returned to Ethan, her expression had changed. "She won't last another day," she said, voice tight with controlled emotion. "The journey was too much." Ethan nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry. She says I should tell you everything." Ayana looked toward the window, gathering herself. "Makia didn't just want me. He murdered my husband when I was already promised, then claimed me as spoils." The revelation hung between them, heavy with implications. "When I refused him, he said I had used witchcraft to bewitch him, that I must be punished." Her hand unconsciously touched a scar visible at her collarbone. "My mother helped me escape during the purification ceremony. They will kill us both if they find us." Ethan absorbed this, anger building beneath his calm exterior. "Wilson won't just take my land. He'll hand you over to Makia." "Yes." Ayana met his gaze directly. "You should leave us. Take your horse, ride north. This isn't your fight." "It became my fight when they ambushed me," Ethan replied, "and when Wilson decided my land was his for taking." Movement at the tree line caught his attention. Riders approaching, at least 6 men, Wilson at the lead. Behind them, more figures on foot, Apache warriors, 7 or 8, with distinctive feathered headbands. "Looks like the parties have arrived," Ethan said grimly. Ayana moved to the window, her face hardening at the sight. "Makia is with them, the one with the red band across his chest." Ethan picked up his Winchester. "Then let's give them a proper welcome." Wilson halted his men at the edge of the clearing, raising a hand in greeting that didn't match his hard expression. "Blackwood," he called out, "we need to talk." Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. "Kind of busy today, Sheriff. Maybe next week." Wilson's false smile faded. "I have warrants for those Apache women, suspected involvement in the Turner raid." "That's a lie and you know it," Ethan replied evenly. "I also have papers regarding this property," Wilson continued, ignoring the accusation. "Seems there are some questions about your deed. Town council wants it examined." Behind Wilson, Makia stepped forward. His face bore a long scar down one cheek, his eyes burning with barely contained rage. "The women are mine," he declared. "Apache law." "They're under my protection," Ethan stated flatly. "American law." Wilson sighed theatrically. "Don't make this difficult, Blackwood. Nobody needs to get hurt." He gestured to his deputies. "We're just doing our job." "Your job," Ethan replied, "or the railroad company's?" Wilson's expression flickered with surprise before hardening again. "One last chance. Surrender the women and come peacefully." Ethan's answer was to level his Winchester at Wilson's chest. The clearing erupted in gunfire. Ethan dove back through the doorway as bullets splintered wood around him. Ayana was already in position at a side window, bow drawn. 8 deputies, Ethan called out, working the lever on his rifle. "Plus Wilson and your friends." "They are not my friends," Ayana replied grimly, loosing an arrow that found its mark in a deputy's shoulder. For 10 minutes, the battle raged. Attackers sought cover behind trees and rocks. Defenders used the cabin's sturdy walls. Ethan and Ayana worked in coordination. When one reloaded, The other provided covering fire. Suddenly, silence fell. Wilson's voice carried across the clearing. "You're outnumbered, Blackwood. Surrender now." Ethan checked his ammunition, running low. "Any ideas?" he asked Ayanna. She glanced at her mother, who watched them with feverish eyes. "Yes, but you won't like it." Before Ethan could respond, a new sound reached them, hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the east. Both sides of the conflict paused, turning toward the noise. Riders appeared, a dozen men in the distinct attire of Texas Rangers, led by a gray-haired man whose bearing suggested military background. "That's far enough, Wilson," the leader called out, his voice carrying authority that stopped the sheriff cold. "Judge Reynolds," Wilson sputtered, "this is county business." "I received some interesting telegrams about your county business," Reynolds interrupted, dismounting, "including reports of collusion with hostile Apache and railroad interests." His gaze swept over the scene, lingering on the Apache warriors before returning to Wilson. "Seems I arrived just in time." Wilson's face drained of color. "These accusations are—" "Save it for your trial," Reynolds cut him off. He turned to his rangers. "Disarm these men and place the sheriff under arrest." As rangers moved to comply, Makia let out a roar of rage, charging toward the cabin with a knife drawn. Ethan swung his rifle around, but Ayanna moved faster. She stepped onto the porch, pistol aimed steadily. "Stop, Makia!" The Apache warrior halted, hatred blazing in his eyes. "You belong to me." "I belong to no one," Ayanna replied in Apache, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "You killed my husband. You drove us from our home. It ends today." Makia tensed to spring. Ayanna's finger tightened on the trigger. "No!" Nala's voice, as surprisingly strong, came from behind them. The elderly woman had dragged herself to the doorway. "No more death." She spoke rapidly in Apache. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but their effect was immediate. The other Apache warriors stirred, murmuring among themselves. One of them, older, with gray streaks in his hair, stepped forward. "She speaks truth," he said in halting English. "Makia lied to us, broke tribal law." Reynolds looked between the Apache and his rangers. "Would your people accept taking him back for your justice?" The older warrior nodded solemnly. Makia, seeing his support evaporating, made one desperate lunge toward Ayanna. Ethan's rifle butt caught him across the temple, dropping him unconscious to the ground. "I believe that concludes negotiations," Reynolds said dryly. Night had fallen by the time order was restored. Wilson and his men were escorted to county jail. The Apache took Makia away, with promises of just punishment under tribal law. Reynolds and his rangers established camp nearby, ensuring peace held. Inside the cabin, Nala's breathing grew more labored. Ayanna sat beside her, holding her hand, singing softly in her native tongue. Ethan stood respectfully distant, giving them privacy in their final moments together. Reynolds joined him near the fire. "You've had quite a day, Captain Blackwood." Ethan hadn't heard his military rank in years. "Not a captain anymore, Judge." "Once an officer, always an officer," Reynolds replied. "You commanded my son at Chancellorsville. He told me you were the finest leader he'd ever served under." Ethan nodded, remembering. "He was a good soldier." "He died at Gettysburg," Reynolds said quietly. "But he wrote me about you. Said if trouble ever found me, I should find Ethan Blackwood." The older man smiled slightly. "Seems trouble found you instead." "It has a habit of doing that," Ethan acknowledged. Reynolds grew serious again. "Wilson's been working with the railroad for months, forcing people off their land, manipulating deeds. Your property was next, valuable for the planned depot. And the Apache raids? Some real, some staged to justify martial law." Reynolds shook his head disgustedly. Wilson found a willing partner in this Makia character, each using the other for their own ends. From the corner, Nala's breathing changed. A final rattling gasp, then stillness. Ayanna bowed her head, still holding her mother's hand. Ethan and Reynolds stood in respectful silence as she performed the rituals of her people, preparing her mother for the journey beyond. Later, they buried Nala on a hillside overlooking the valley. Ayanna stood straight back beside the grave, her grief contained but palpable. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked as they walked back toward the cabin. "I cannot return to my people," she replied. "Not yet, perhaps never." Ethan nodded, understanding. "You have skills. Could make your way anywhere." "And you," she asked, "will you stay now that the railroad wants your land?" "This is my home," he said simply. "I don't run from fights." They reached the porch steps and paused, looking out over the moonlit property. The rangers' campfires glowed in the distance. "Your mother said you were perfect to help with my land," Ethan said after a long silence. "Was she right?" Ayanna considered this. "I know hunting, tracking, planting. I can build, repair, defend." She met his gaze directly. "I need no pity or charity, only fair exchange." Ethan extended his hand. "Partners, then. This land has room for 2 fighters." Ayanna clasped his hand firmly. "Partners." A month later, as spring began softening winter's grip, the cabin had expanded. A second room had been added, a larger corral built. Vegetables sprouted in neat rows where Ayanna had planted them. Ethan stood on the porch, watching a rider approach, Judge Reynolds, returning from the county seat. "Railroad's changed its plans," Reynolds announced without preamble. "Depot's going in 5 miles south. Your land is safe." "Good news," Ethan replied, offering the judge coffee. Reynolds accepted the cup, glancing around appreciatively. "Place looks different. Better." His eyes found Ayanna working with horses in the corral. "You two settling in all right?" "Partners find their rhythm," Ethan said simply. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "I could use a man with your experience, Blackwood. Rangers need good officers." "Already got a job," Ethan replied, gesturing to the homestead. "Fair enough." Reynolds finished his coffee and stood. "But if trouble comes calling again—" "It always does," Ethan said with the ghost of a smile. After Reynolds departed, Ethan joined Ayanna at the corral fence. They stood side by side, watching the sun set over land that was truly theirs now. Not as husband and wife, but as warriors who had found respect in each other's strength. "This is not just land," Ethan said quietly. "It's legacy." Ayanna nodded. "And home." As darkness fell, a rider appeared on the distant trail, a messenger with a telegram. Ethan read it quickly, expression growing serious. "What is it?" Ayanna asked. "Trouble," Ethan replied, handing her the paper. "Outlaws raiding settlements along the border. Reynolds needs experienced fighters." Their eyes met in silent communication, a decision made without words. Some battles ended. Others were just beginning.